You are now tuned in to the Gifted Gab.
We're here, 1K Convos, back and we better. I got a very special guest with me today. He goes by the name of Sahr. What's going on?
What's up? What's up?
It wasn't the best introduction, but
it's all good. We've been talking for like the last hour or so.
I know. A lot of the stuff I was like, damn, I wish we were rolling. A lot of gems. You know, I've been admiring you from afar, from when we used to work at EXO. Kind of watched you do the bartending, got in the bartending game myself. Yeah. Watched the modeling thing. Got in the modeling game myself, and now you're just, full-fledged tech entrepreneur. You're putting on for Edmonton. I admire what you're doing for the city. I told you before, like, Edmonton is where it's at. Edmonton might have to hire me as a spokesperson.
Not very many people saying that, but yeah, you're right. You're right.
What is it about Edmonton that that you decided this is where you wanted to plant your foot and build something?
Well, I mean, thanks for having me. I think I've been following your guys' come up for a while, given that, Andre, he's also part of the U of A kind of alumni team. Well, he's not alumni. Is he alumni yet?
Not yet. He's got one more year.
Yeah, so he's part of the Bears Nation camp there, and you always want to show support for the homies and stuff. And like you said, working with you and the club scene back in the days, when we were young bucks, it's neat how people from kind of different arenas of your life kind of connect and work on things, right? I find that really, really admirable. And yeah, I mean, kind of regards to a lot of the stuff that I've been fortunate to get into, it's, I do like to kind of give the full disclosure to people that, sometimes it is all smokes and mirrors, right? Like, there's so much ugliness that goes on behind the scenes and so much turmoil and things that may not make the most latest Instagram headline. And I think that's just really important to point out, especially for people that may be listening or tuning in or following either of our stories, because with the glitz and glamour that comes with all of it, there's a lot of, struggle and growth and things that people don't generally like to experience, right? So I just like to give that full disclosure to people, because, yeah, you can maybe look at my Instagram profile or follow my story and be like, oh, man, like, he's got it made or something, right? But obviously that's not the case. I think we're all learning and growing and finding our own path in this journey called life. To get to your question about Edmonton, I think, as we were kind of discussing a little bit earlier, when you're looking at getting involved into something new and something that you want to build into something big, you gotta be able to consider some of the trends down the road that people may not see, right? Peter Thiel, he's a very famous investor. He asks a very important question when he goes to invest in a new company. And he asks the founders of that company is, what is something that you believe that very few people will agree with you on? And generally, if there's a good answer that correlates to that business idea, that's generally one of the good points of feedback that he looks for when he goes to make an investment. Take, for example, some of the big names in business or tech that we see nowadays, whether it's Airbnb or Uber or SpaceX or Tesla, right? 10, 20 years ago, if you were to tell people that you were going to try and reuse rocket ships and play the game of space transportation better than NASA or some of the nation state agencies, people would laugh at you and wouldn't really give you the time of day. 10, 20 years ago, if you were to tell people that you were going to revolutionize the hotel model and create a way for people to rent out rooms in their houses or basements in their houses and create a safe model and a brand where people would feel trusted to do that, a lot of people would look at you really, really crazy. So when Peter Thiel asked that question, and he's looking for those latent ideas and latent trends that people may not recognize right away. And that generally is at least the good foundation of a big and vast business idea. So when it comes to investing in a city or investing in a region, when I look at Edmonton, there are some latent things that, as we were kind of discussing in our earlier conversation, that the general population may just not see it. We may not necessarily, it's not right up in front of our face, in the sense of we're basically witnessing a downtown core transform before our eyes, right? When I started university here, there was no such thing as the ICE district. There was no Stantec Tower. There was no City of Edmonton Tower. There was no JW Marriott. But basically within the span of 10 to 12 years, we've seen billions of dollars being poured into the downtown investment, right? So that's a trend that's really, really unique and something that maybe now some people are more catching on to, but back then it wasn't really obvious in terms of why are people making these type of investments here in the region. I mean, you mentioned some stuff around technology and AI in some of our earlier conversations, right? As we look at the technology that's impacting our daily lives and helping us make every single decision every single day, the nearest gas station that we search on Google Maps, or, find me the best Persian rug dealer in Edmonton, hopefully, your location is coming up, but we're allowing algorithms and computers to make these decisions for us every single day. And the neat thing, I think the opportunity, but yet the threat, is that these are all being written by humans, right? It's humans like you and I who have biases, who take what we believe is correct and input that into some code that people then use on software. And if we think of how powerful that is, that we can influence consumer behavior by transmuting an idea out of our head, putting it into code, and having other people use that product or service, that's really, really powerful. So the underlying thread of all of this technology that we're getting used to in our daily lives is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And the fact that in our backyard here in the city of Edmonton and the University of Alberta, we have one of the best artificial intelligence institutions in the entire world, right? I mean, at one point we were competing with the Harvards, the Yales, the, Ivy Leagues of the world and stuff for this type of content and this type of knowledge. And we have that right here in our backyard. So kind of rounding everything out, when you take and consider some of these trends that may not be obvious to the general population, and you kind of envision yourself in 10, 20 years down the road, and you think of what the world will look like, at least from your perspective, and you start to ask that question of, what is something that I believe that very few people may not understand? Some of these things start to line up, and you start to think, oh crap, like, this city has the framework, has the baseline for what's going to drive consumer behavior and commerce in the future. So all things considered, I think Edmonton is a really, really great place to build a foundation. And I mean, it's also fairly affordable, and you get a really good bang for your buck and, high quality of living and stuff, right? So yeah, that's my roundabout answer there.
That's a very, very detailed answer, and you touched on a few things there. But the biggest thing I take away from that is that AI is the way of the future. You know, as we see society progress, we see the middle class disappear more and more and more, right? And this is because, you know, AI has taken, you know, a lot of the things that humans used to do and is doing them at a much more accurate rate. I mean,
Yep.
how can you go against or compete with a machine that can do a calculation in a tenth of a second?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know, artificial intelligence can probably tell me what I'm gonna wear tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, so when you understand that how powerful these algorithms are and the coding and everything that goes into them, you know, it does make our lives much easier. But do you think AI might be making our lives a little too easy? Is there a threat to, you know, growing up, you obviously know you had to do a lot of things yourself. You know, does AI take away our independence in a sense?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I think this is the first time in human existence that there's a chance that there might be a more superior being that's much more powerful, much more knowledgeable, much more efficient than a human being. And so just providing that context, I think that can be really scary for people. I mean, it is scary if you think about it. But on the flip side, and looking at the full spectrum, humans are very, very good at adapting. And humans are very good at exerting, you know, and this can be looked at two different ways, whether it's positive or negative, but exerting our world dominance, right? I mean, if you look at human history and the wiping out of the Neanderthals, I think they're called, and you know, different other species that were a threat to human beings, yet we found a way to contain our dominance. Now we are dealing with a much more powerful, much more thorough, much more fluid entity, and that's in, you know, artificial intelligence algorithms or machine learning, big data, you know, supercomputing. I mean, the list goes on and on in terms of the technology that we're up against. You know, the best analogy that I like to give is, I mean, imagine if you are an ant and you know, there's this ant crawling on this table, and there's a human with his finger against the ant, right? When the ant uses different receptors and, you know, antennas in its brain, it can only sense the finger that's in front of his brain. It can't sense everything, this whole person that's behind it. You know, I think that's where we are right now as human beings in this kind of, you know, as we kind of either grow or be annihilated. You know, we're this just little ant, and we just don't know what's on the other side of that door, what's on the other side of that finger, because it's not just artificial intelligence and machine learning that's on the upbringing. It's things like augmented reality and virtual reality and big data and quantum computing and, you know, genome sequencing and, you know, 17, 18, 19, 20 different technologies that are as disruptive as the internet, mobile phones, and social media were 10, 20 years ago. Now, there's not a day in our lives that we go where we don't use those three things. In the next 20 years, we're going to get 20 more of these highly disruptive tools and technology that we don't even know what we're going to do with this type of power. And the thing about technology is that it makes us very powerful, but it doesn't change who we are. So as we go down through this journey and we explore being that ant that's facing that finger. The job is to change the internal DNA of who we are as human beings, working on things like our empathy, our communication, our relationship building, our fortitude. That is going to, I think that's what's going to help us navigate through this very disruptive and uncertain future, is if we're able to master ourselves and then accelerate our abilities with everything that the world and technology and, if you're spiritual or, God-given, that we're going to be handed down to us. So I think that's one thread or one area to look at it at. I think another thing to consider is there's two things, right? If let's say I move to Edmonton for the first time, I don't speak a lick of English. And let's say I move from Sierra Leone and I'm still trying to figure out my way around here, or I'm still trying to, get a job. If I have a driver's license, what's one thing that I could do?
Uber, what's the other one? Skip the dishes.
Exactly. You can be an Uber driver. You can, deliver food. This is, so AI doesn't just remove jobs. It actually adds way more than it removes, because now that newcomer doesn't have to know the street directions, probably doesn't even have to know really good English. He or she can just plug in their phone and just learn what the different alerts and notifications means. Turn when the car tells you to turn, go into the restaurant when the car when the phone tells you to go into the restaurant, pick up the order number, show your phone, and you're making $100 a night, right? And, if we look even further back into history, we've been through dramatic changes like this before, right? We've been through the agricultural revolution. We've been through industrialization. We've been through even the ability to write. I mean, imagine living at a time where we transition from not having the ability to write to having the ability to write. And just the world of ability that was basically, we kind of talked about it a little bit briefly, but there's a 6 Ds to disruption. And we talked about dematerialization and digitization. But there's another thing that technology gives us is decentralization, right? So just like how you're able to set up this podcast infrastructure with very, little resources compared to what things were like 20 to 30 years ago, now these, radio or broadcasting companies that honed all this power and control the mass media had now been decentralized, right? We've been through all these transitions before as human beings. So that's why I feel that I have confidence in who we are as a race and how we can adapt and learn. But it doesn't happen without, if we look at what's happening in the United States right now, and you have a very volatile, number 45 who's in office, and you say or you do the wrong thing, and he or she having the power to unleash a cold war with, let's say, other nation states and stuff, right? Now that we have access to nuclear technology and artificial intelligence and all this stuff, it's really, really dangerous if we don't work on who we are at the core, and if we don't understand empathy and understand other human beings and understand how to compromise. So I don't think AI is replacing us per se. I mean, I think there is definitely an imminent threat of us being faced with a superior being that's maybe much more smarter and agile than humans. But I have faith in the human race. I think we've proved it over the last 200,000 years since we've evolved in the sub-Saharan deserts of Africa. And I think the future is bright, but that isn't to say that we can't work on ourselves.
I think, you know, it starts with ourselves, right? You know, you got to be able to look in the mirror and hope that you're working towards bettering yourself every day. And you mentioned that, you know, the human race is the best race when it comes to adapting. You know, we've like dominated in so many different fields, in so many different areas. And, you know, our consciousness is the one thing that separates us from every other race on the planet. You know, it's that we know we can die. You know, so we don't take the days for granted as a human race. And I love what AI has done. You know, when you talk about being disruptive, you know, Airbnb, Uber, Tesla, these companies, like you said, 20 years ago, if these guys came up and said, hey, this is what we want to do, look at you like you're crazy.
Can I stay in your basement?
It sounds
can I get in your car?
ridiculous.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You know, going from, you know, going to Blockbuster every Friday night to now you're just sitting in your front of the screen. Every movie's in front of you because of Netflix, Crave, Amazon Prime. You know, it's fascinating, the accessibility that technology has brought us.
And there isn't a better time to now switch from being just consumers of these technologies to actually producers of these technologies, because it's never been easier to identify a problem that you have in your life or something that you think that a group of people are suffering from, and creating a solution to it, and taking that solution and building it to a place where, you know, you have team members and you have revenue and you have products, right? Like I'm not a software programmer, right? I understand, you know, some of the very preliminary things about artificial intelligence and algorithms and all that sort of stuff. But I by no means am I like a data scientist or an AI engineer or any that sort, you know, any of those things. But either were the Airbnb founders, right? Either was the Uber founders, right? What they understood was the power of the internet. And, you know, especially, it's really interesting when you read the Airbnb story, and, you know, they would go to the different hotel chains and, you know, they would talk to seasoned hotel veterans and executives, and they would basically, again, just laugh them out of the building because they were like, you kids, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't, you know, we've been in this industry for 25 years. You don't know, you know, anything that we've seen, or you don't have the experience that we have. And before we know it, Airbnb is, you know, arguably the biggest hotel chain, but it doesn't own any property per se, right? So I think it's really important that people consider themselves or get themselves in the mindset of being producers of these things, and not really, you know, if you want, it does give you a competitive edge to maybe get a little bit familiar with how the technology works and stuff. But first is just understanding what the possible capabilities are and what this could mean if you're able to create something out of it, right? Because that is what's unlocking value. That's what's creating, that's the new kind of gold rush, right? That is the new opportunities, right? You're seeing, you know, I go to the Bay Area at least every like few months. I mean, before COVID, at least every month. And you're seeing these 21, 22, 23-year-olds basically just, you know, walking around, and, you know, you talk to them, and, you know, these guys have 100, 200 people companies, you know, just in Palo Alto or some of the main, you know, California tech hubs and stuff, right? So the opportunity is there, right? I think we just have to be producers of this material, right, instead of just consumers.
When you talk about Airbnb and you talk about Netflix and these disruptive companies, the business model hasn't really changed if you think about it. You know, middlemen are the ones who get paid. You know, it's the middleman who makes the most money, and Airbnb and Netflix are middlemen essentially. Amazon is a middleman, right? And the business model itself hasn't changed. Just the way they deliver the products, the goods, the services has changed. You know, you've just taken away the inventory.
Exactly.
You know, having to hold inventory, or having to have real estate, or having to have a fleet of cars. You know, once you simplify, and that's really what technology is doing. It's helping us simplify things. So it's I'm excited to see where technology takes us. You know, tech has made my life way much easier. You know, even when you talk about, you know, the store, I mean, if it wasn't for technology, if it wasn't for having a MacBook and, you know, access to the internet, you know, I probably wouldn't be here in Edmonton in the store in the first place. You know, I wouldn't have the podcast. So, you know, the villainizing of tech and AI, and I think is more of a byproduct of social media and people wanting to be looking for something to be offended by. You know, obviously there's some things that people should actually be offended by, but for a lot of the time there's a lot of stuff that people are fishing for to have a word about or have a say on that isn't always necessarily negative. You know, it's all about perspective. And, you know, which kind of brings me to my next point, you know, being a black man in Edmonton, you know, how did, you know, not just COVID was one part of it, but the race relations and everything go on, you know, how did that affect you, affect your day-to-day, your business? You know, how did you take everything that was going on?
Yeah, really good question. And again, a lot to unpack there. But I mean, just kind of rewinding a little bit, you know, I think the reason why as human beings we look for the negative information or negative energy per se is, you know, we have this tiny lizard brain, we gotta cut this part out. We have this tiny lizard brain that has basically helped us get to where we are.
Survival,
you know?
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Fight versus flight, right? I mean, if we're walking down the street and we see a bear and our first reaction is to, you know, use our, you know, frontal cortex or our more cognitive function to think, how is this bear doing today? You know, should I go and pet it, give it a glass of water? We're probably not going to make it out. So there's a purpose for that. But I think as we receive exponential technology, we now have to think of how we can be exponential thinkers. And instead of being linear thinkers where, you know, 200,000 years ago, if there's something that happened in, you know, one village in Africa, and the only way that the other village was finding out about that is if they sent a carrier pigeon or if they sent a messenger to go out. Now, I mean, unfortunately with, you know, what's happened in Beirut and in Lebanon, you know, it's very, very, you know, unfortunate, but just think of how quick the world caught on to that, and think of how quick we were able to learn about everything that happened and exactly how it happened almost, right? And we were able to see vividly high quality 1080, you know, K picture of what people are experiencing. So, you know, we now have to transition from being less linear thinkers to exponential thinkers, which kind of brings me a little bit to your next question in terms of how COVID impacted me and us, and Black Lives Matter impacted me and us. Arguably, I think it was one of the best things that happened to me personally, and we've recently made it the best thing that happened to our business. And I mean, just starting with me, I'm a very introverted person, right? So having the ability to have phone calls with people remotely and not having to take that extra transit time to get to location XYZ, or, you know, usually I'd be jumping like meeting to meeting and stuff. You know, I have way more time in my day to do the things that I want to do. And it's, you know, one of my friends who she, you know, she has a lot of like contrarian viewpoints when it comes to things that are happening in our world and stuff. And, you know, she said that Donald Trump was the best thing that happened to America. And your first impression of that statement is very, wow, that's offensive, right? You're using your white privilege to completely ignore the tensions or the challenges that you know, number 45 brings to the table.
You can't keep calling him number 45. Number 45 is MJ.
I'm glad we cleared that out. I'm going to say 45P. But if you really just unpack that and you boil that down, I mean, what's the first step when you try to solve a problem? You have to first identify the problem.
You got to acknowledge it.
You got to acknowledge. And arguably, when Barack was in office, America felt that they won racial tensions and that racism was a thing that they can now kind of write off because, oh my gosh, we have the first black president in office. You know,
it's a symbolic victory, but I say symbolic in that it's not a really, it wasn't a tangible
correct
solution and victory, right? Exactly. It was just, you know, yeah, he's there, but in the grand scheme of things, is it a big step? Yeah, but nothing has been solved.
Correct, exactly. And that's a really good point, because what's bubbling at the undercurrents of the U.S., it really wasn't given that light of day because no one was really acknowledging the problem or calling a spade a spade. Mm-hmm. But now with Trump and just his ability to garner divisiveness and cause divisiveness amongst, you know, disparate groups of pockets of people globally now are looking at that and be like, oh, okay, this is messed up. You know, we got to address this. Mm-hmm. And if, you know, my naive assumption is that if, you know, Barack was still in office and the unfortunate passings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and you know, Ahmaud Arbery happened, I think Barack would have been really, really good at uniting the country really, really fast, which again would not address what's happening at the undercurrents. Mm-hmm. But because, I mean, has Trump even come out and even acknowledge racial tensions and acknowledge the struggles that African Americans, Black Americans face? No, and I think that's why we're experiencing one of the biggest civil rights movement, or the biggest civil rights movement history, or in all of history, movements in all of history, is because of this fact that, you know, you have all these like factors that are contributing to exposing what's really happening at the undercurrents. Oh yeah, and it's you know, we take it back to social media. It's giving us a direct view of these things happening in real time. Exactly.
You know? Yeah. We're seeing police, you know, shove down old men. Yeah. We're seeing them throw protesters in unmarked cars. Yeah. We're seeing a whole bunch of things that, you know, if this movement was happening 50, 60 years ago, we wouldn't see this stuff, right?
Exactly.
Because, you know, the narrative and the media would be in the hands of other people. But now the agency in that, you know, we all have phones, we all have Twitter, we all have Instagram, we all are able to showcase what's going on. And on top of that, you have, you know, a president who has actually amplified everything going on.
That's a great word.
You know, he's amplified everything, and it's no longer just underneath the surface. It's in front of you, and now you have to engage with it.
Yep.
And it's interesting because another thing we saw is, you know, companies had to take a stand. Organizations had to take a stand because you can't act like it's not happening anymore. And, you know, the organizations that spoke out and said, you know, we don't stand by this. You made your stance clear, but then there's a lot of companies, some that I've even worked for, that have, you know, tried to play both sides, or, you know, be nonpartisan. But we have to take into consideration that this is that flies.
Slide on my nose.
We have to really take in that this is no longer a political issue. This is a human rights issue. You know, black people have built America. You know, and America is arguably, well, no, not arguably, in their eyes, the leader of the free world. You know, so you can't keep this stuff under wraps for too long. Sooner or later, it's going to implode. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. I really think we're seeing the end of America.
It's bold.
It's very bold, but I mean, you know, when you have COVID going on, right, and people are stripped from their day-to-day lives, you know, people have to ask themselves, you know, what do I stand for? Not just in race relations, in life in general. You know, you're no longer tied to what you do as your 9 to 5. You really have to confront who you are as a person, which is very uncomfortable for a lot of people.
100%,
You know, it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have to confront yourself and have that self-talk with yourself and ask yourself what it is that I contribute to the world. What am I here for? What is my purpose? That's a very, very uncomfortable conversation that I've had with myself. I know you've had that with yourself. And, you know, the fact of the matter is sometimes people are too busy to have that conversation. But now there's no excuse.
Well, you know, I think this is based on things like the assembly line and, you know, the creation of the V8 engine and just how that accelerated car production and stuff. We started treating humans the same way, in the sense where we wanted to mass produce and mass create how people thought, felt, and how they did things, when, as you blankly stated, we're very different individuals. And what your purpose is in life and your skill sets and the things that make you unique and the things that you're passionate about and what the world will value from you is completely different from mine. And so we've now moved away from this arena of mass production to, oh crap, like, we have to help people become a little bit more personalized and a little bit more true to who they are. So unfortunately, I wouldn't necessarily blame the individual too much. It's just the architecture of the system that we've grown up in. You know, the classroom, and, you know, you raise your hand to speak, you walk down in this hallway, you only go outside when the recess bell rings and stuff. So and, you know, you can argue that it's worked to some degree, right? We can't look back and say that everything has been all bad, because, you know, not everybody is, let's say, as driven as you or I are. And they need that structure, step by step, and structure and guideline and map to help them live just that comfortable life that they want to live to. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And in fact, we need that, right? You know, when let's say you're building a company and you're the big picture CEO and you have all the audacious ideas and vision and strategy and stuff, or maybe not strategy, you know, you need that person that's able to bring you down to earth and be like, all right, this is how we map this out. This is how we get from point A to point B. This is how we make sure that we're not burning too much cash before we get to the goal post or the next payday or something, right? So you do need that structure in different facets and different aspects of our lives and stuff. So it isn't all bad.
Absolutely.
But what technology has provided us is the ability to be very, very customized, right? Where even the educational institution is being revitalized because we can get really, really personalized, right? You can go on the internet and say that you want to learn about AI and blockchain and quantum computing, and you can have a computer algorithm point you to the exact courses and which ones you have to take when, and which professor you got to meet, and which mentors you got to get in your life. And you can get really, really personal, even down to your learning style, right? School wasn't really good for me because when I entered my second and third year university, I only had a grade 11, 12 reading level. So now you're going to one of the top universities in the world, and thankfully for my scholarship, you know, I didn't necessarily have to worry about tuition or anything, but you're going to a top university and you're competing with really, really bright students, and you only have a grade 11 or 12 reading level, but my ability to audibly digest information that comes my way, or watch a video and tinker around and learn how that person is doing and apply it to how I'm doing it. You know, my ability to do stuff like that was considerably better than, let's say, the next individual. So now, you know, if you look at just the ecosystem of education and how it's being deconstructed to be built up to be very personalized to the individual, you know, there's immense opportunity there. But we have to be able to just unlearn is a big word, what we've been accustomed to and what we've been used to in every single institution, from education to government to work and career to everything, right? And it's a very audacious task. And for those folks that have never been through that process before, or never looked themselves in the mirror and really asked that question, what am I good at? What can the world pay me for? What does the world need? And what am I passionate about? And really try and draw a box around those four arenas. It's very, very scary. And again, it kind of goes back to my first point. We have to be able to have the ability to develop some of these human characteristics and long lost human traits internally. Leadership, right? Again, empathy, and just working in teams, and, you know, just even the ability to just like sit in your sadness, or sit in your fear, or sit in the things that make you scared, and ask yourself the question of, why am I feeling this way, right? Why am I getting nervous about going to pitch to RBC, right? When I've accomplished X, Y, Z, and they called this meeting to have it with me and with us. Why am I nervous? But again, it's our lizard brain, right? It's our fight versus flight mentality. So we have to kind of acknowledge it, sit with it, but realize that as humans, we've been equipped with so much more.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, as individuals, we're powerful beyond measure. We just have to figure out in what ways we are powerful. You know, and that's an interesting story you said about how you were at, you know, the U of A, and you had a grade 11, 12 reading level, but you were able to find what worked for you, right? Because there is no cookie cutter formula for this thing called life. If there was a blueprint for life, you know, we'd all be reading it and following it, right? And that's why, you know, our experiences and are so important, and our own path is so, you know, important to us, and for us to figure these things out, right? Which brings me to my next question. Like, how did basketball translate for you, you know, in creating C Tribe and getting into the tech world? How did it translate?
There's a lot that came from basketball. I think the biggest impact that it had on my life was just the willingness to see things through, and just developing that level of grit to be like, fuck, today is hella hard, right? I got to go to workout in the morning. Then got to go to school. I then got to go to have a shoot around at lunch, go back to school, then have practice and then do suicides before I even, get to sit down and rest and stuff.
And do homework.
Yeah. But it taught you that grit to be like, okay, today might suck, but if I get into this routine and I modify my body to notice this as being normalized, then not only am I getting used to this practice or this routine, but I'm able to take the next step to even push myself a little bit harder the next day. And if I continue on this trend, there might be a light at the end of the tunnel, right? There's no guarantee that we're going to win the championship or make it to nationals or win Canada West, but we're taking the right steps to get there. And we might get lucky at the end of this path or at the end of this journey. And I think that's what a lot of, what life is about, right? If we even look at the story of SpaceX, I was reading just this little post and it was saying how in 2008, SpaceX, they had failed their rocket launch, 3 consecutive times. And Elon Musk was basically down to his last self-worth. Mm-hmm. And for a guy like that, we're still talking millions of dollars and stuff, right? But, he had a decision to make as to whether he was going to invest into SpaceX and keep that company going. He had another company at the time, Solar City, what now has been, I think it's been acquired by Tesla I think it's been acquired by Tesla, but that company was also struggling and kind of finding its whims and stuff. So he had a choice as to whether he was going to take his last dollar and invest it into SpaceX or invest it into Solar City, with both companies kind of being on the cusp of failure and everybody writing him and his organization off. And he took his dollar and invested it into both companies. And thankfully for him, it worked out. But, he basically came to the realization that by going down this path is more riskier than taking the lump sum of money and just plugging it into just one company and letting the other one die. Mm. And so I think sport is really similar to that, right? We make these investments in our routine, in our team, in our craft, and there's no guarantee that there's going to be any success or that you're going to see that fruit of the labor down the road. But what the beautiful thing that comes out of it is just that level of grit, right? And that level of looking your challenge in the eye and being like, I'm going to take this on today, and there's nothing that can get in my way. Mm-hmm. And so, I think just sport is just such a beautiful thing. There's such a beautiful thing about that. And you can see it in like the athletes that are coming up too. And I think that's why athletes make really, really good business owners, because, kind of to one of my first points, there's some very unglamorous things that you have to do on a day-to-day to keep your business alive, right? Mm-hmm. From one day you're sweeping the floors, you're being an admin, you're the counselor, you're painting walls, whatever you got to do to just, keep things alive. But, the more that you kind of learn your systems and processes, the more you'll be like, holy crap, like this is actually getting easier. The more that I kind of get into these routines and stuff, right? So yeah, sports has been just like really good for me, and just, that's something that I look for in like team members as well, is just that level of grit and just like dedication to getting better. Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing about sports is like, you're going to war with a bunch of people that have the same goal as you, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. You're all coming together for one common goal.
Exactly.
So when you're, going into the business world, it's the same thing. You're going to war with a bunch of people that have the same goal as you. And, from sport to that translates because that's a familiar environment. That's a very familiar scenario day in, day out. And it's about laying, one brick at a time. But you mentioned how Elon put, all his money into these two companies when he could have chosen one. Most people don't diversify in that situation, right? Some people give up.
Yeah.
Right. And it brought me, it made me think of a point Dame Dash mentioned in an interview. Yeah. He said, I don't keep any of my money. I put it all back on the street. Yeah. And, when people, I think people misinterpret that. But I understand what he's saying. What Elon does is he doubles down on himself.
For sure, yeah.
He doubles down on, he's confident in himself. It's almost, on the outside looking in, it's almost a sense of delusion.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is.
You have this belief in what you're doing, and you're saying, I'm putting 10 mil on, myself coming out at the end of this.
Yeah. Well, mathematically, it doesn't make sense, right? It is delusional. Mathematically, it doesn't make sense for 44 teams in Canada to be fighting for one trophy at the end of a 9-month period. It doesn't make sense. There's only going to be 1 out of 44 that's going to get to the end. So it is a level of delusion, but it's the process of what you're getting out from that, right?
And I think you need that. We say delusion, and that is what it is. Yeah, like you said, that is what it is. You need a little bit of that, though, because the numbers will never tell you when something is a safe investment or if something is a safe risk. There's no such thing, right? So that level of delusion is so necessary. And, everybody's risk aversion is not the same. Not everybody has the same tolerance for risk. But, what COVID showed me was that, okay, at this time, with everything up in limbo like this, it's time for me to quadruple down on myself.
Yeah, 100%.
And not leave it in the air for somebody else to, wave a paycheck in my face and say, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you do need that sense of delusion. You do need that sense of confidence, and I think you do get that from sports. Sport is the experience you get from sports is priceless, no matter what sport you play.
Yeah.
It instills discipline, it instills goal setting, it instills grit, and grit is probably the most important aspect of any pursuit, whether it's art, whether it's business, whether it's podcasting, rapping, whatever it is. When adversity is looking you in your eye, how you respond to it is what's important, not what happened or how it goes down. Is how you bounce back from everything.
100%, yeah.
So, I think it's really exciting that Edmonton can call you one of their own, and that you're so invested in seeing the city grow. And I wish, I do kind of wish more people would see it that way, because coming from Toronto, big city, like you were saying, it looks glamorous, it looks good, everything looks nice in Toronto, but it's a tough place to cut it.
Yeah.
And you'll never really see it in the Instagram photos or on Google Images. It kind of takes you having to live there and see people you grow up with, not make it. People you grow up with not get to see a certain age. People you grow up with not, be thinking on the same level as you, or even make it finish high school. So, we always think that the grass is greener on the other side, but the grass is greener where you water it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Basic gardening, man. Why? What made you start C Tribe? What made you get into that space? Because it's more than just events. It's more than just I know it's more than just you. It's usually when we're doing things like this, it's bigger than us, and it should be bigger than you. Yeah. It should never be, I'm doing this for the money. It should never be, I'm doing this because I want the recognition. It's always something bigger than the individual. So what is it for you?
Speaking of big cities, I had a chance to live in New York City for a while, and I mean, if you could imagine, small town kid, mid-20s, moving to the concrete jungle, and just the excitement and energy that you would have. You know, we had a software company at the time called Capsule, and basically what we were building was this, it's kind of like, you know Yelp?
Yep.
So kind of like Yelp for video. So instead of, going on Yelp and reading recommendations in terms of, places to eat or things to do, you would receive, video recommendations, right? So for example, I mean, how does somebody describe your store, right? Like in written word. It's like, yeah, there's rugs, and the wall's red, and it's a beautiful place. I recommend that you go get your rugs from there, right? But I mean, the power of video, I mean, kind of back to one of our earlier conversations of, the power that we have in our pocket with just, some high resolution cameras and stuff, and just how that has changed the way that we interpret things and how we interact, and even social media and stuff. Just seeing video content of places and spaces and things that we want to experience, and then layering on the fact that if, let's say, I'm going to Toronto and you and I have very similar interests, right? We like the same sports, we like the same food. There's a lot of the things that we find, we share general interests with, right? It's much easier for me to be like, hey, Alex, I'm going to Toronto. What are some of the things that I should get into and stuff, right? So, and, what we were trying to solve was we found that Yelp didn't have that level of, I guess, like personalization or even like social recommendation kind of built into like its platform and stuff, right? You were just going online and you're reading random stuff from people that you didn't know. And
could be fake too, right?
Could be fake, yeah. I mean, there's a whole other thing on just like fake reviews and people who have never even visited the location writing negative stuff, but that's for a whole other conversation. But, we thought that we could create a platform that was similar to Yelp, but it was based on recommendations from our friends and based on video content, right? And, even like hindsight's only 2020, but eventually it would even be more like inbound and kind of AI driven, in the sense that as soon as I booked that flight to Toronto, now I don't have the task of getting in touch with all my friends in Toronto and receiving recommendations from them, or going on Yelp and doing that outbound work of receiving recommendations and stuff. I would then, as soon as I booked that flight and it showed up in my calendar on Gmail, it would notify my friends being like, hey, Sahr's going to Toronto from August 18th to 26th. I saw, Alex, that you were there, or you lived there for the last 8 years. Make sure that you send your favorite, we call them capsules. Make sure you send your favorite capsules with him so that he can make sure that he can have a really good time and stuff, right? So it kind of just handled a lot of the inbound work of finding those like recommendations and things to get into and stuff, right? So we were building this product, we were seeing some fairly significant growth, especially in like the local region here and stuff. And, we raised a 6-figure friends and family round. So, I mean, if you can imagine, just like graduating school and, I had this tech team of, 4 or 5 people, and, we raised 6 figures. You'd look at your bank account and you see those numbers light up and stuff. We were just like, man, like we're on one, right? We're doing this. And then we get a call to go interview for this accelerator program in New York City. So like at this point, like just our ego was just like through the roof, right? Because hey, like New York is calling. They like our product. They read our application and they like what we're doing. So this must be it. So this was about August. I wasn't leaving to New York until about October. So there was about like a 3-month window. And by like August, we were about like halfway burnt through our friends and family round and stuff. So we spent half of the money that we raised and stuff, because when you're building a software company, you're not making any money. You're just investing into the technology, into the code, the algorithms, the user experience, and all that sort of stuff, right?
It runs out quick.
Yeah, exactly. So, come October, I'm getting on that plane, and I'm looking at the bank account, and I'm like, man, like, scratching my head. Shit. We really got to blow it out of the water with this trip, because, we may not make it for the next 6 to 8 months and stuff, right? So I take out a spot on my friend's couch. New York's really expensive, right? It's paying like $1,500 or something.
On the couch?
On the couch.
Damn.
Yeah. It was in the
$1,500 for a couch.
It was in the Upper East Side or something of Manhattan. Just crazy. So the accelerator program, they invited us for an interview. So me as a CEO, I had to basically go through the interview rounds and make the compelling case as to why they should accept us in this program. And then, then we would receive like a cash injection, and then we would, receive all these like mentors and stuff of people that have been in our space and stuff. So there was a lot of pressure on me, being the person who had to kind of go and almost be like the breadwinner for the company and stuff, right? While we still had a team of about 3 or 4 people back home working on the product and stuff. Long story short, we didn't get into the program. But I had taken out enough time there to be there for like the next like 4 months and stuff, right? So I'm like, shit, like, didn't get into the program. We're running out of cash. We're trying to like get this product off the ground and stuff. Just really, really stressed, and just like, experiencing things and like challenges of like leadership and building a company that I've just never experienced before, right? Especially for like the first year, where things were just really smooth sailing. We launched our first iteration of our product. We got users, we got money in the bank, we got, brand ambassadors and people believing in what we were building and stuff. But every Friday morning I would wake up and I would go to this event. It would start at like 7 a.m. And if anybody has lived in New York before, they understand just how crazy the subway system is there. And, it literally takes you so much time to get from one side of the city to the other, or even just like within the city and stuff. But I would wake up every morning, make it to this event at this coffee shop at 7 a.m. And this event called Founders Friday. And what it would just be a live conversation like this, no podcast equipment, but just 40, 50 people in the room, interviewer, interviewee, and they would interview some of the emerging leaders that were from New York City and the greater New York area, right? Like people that had raised, hundreds of millions of dollars for their AI company, or fashion, and, people that, modeled in New York Fashion Week. Every week it would be someone like completely different, and like these big time, like young bucks that were just on the come up in like New York City. And for me, being from Edmonton, Alberta, had never had like experienced something like this before. It was just like, whoa, like I was just not starstruck, but I was like, holy crap.
It's
like,
powerful. It resonated.
The level of people that are in this room, and the way that they think, and how they like drive their ideas, and how they just have so much conviction in what they're working on, was just like so powerful for me, like experiencing it for the first time. And I mean, another word is just like how delusional they were, and how much they just doubled down and believed in themselves, right? But then the next thing that was really powerful was then walking around the room after the interview was done and talking to the investment bankers, talking to the other people that worked on in the fashion district, talking to the other startup companies, and just like the hybrid and mix of talent and people there that would come every Friday morning to participate in this event, right? And for like weeks and weeks and weeks, I would just go, and every week I would just be exposed to like a new industry, a new person, a new talent, a new personality. And it was just like the best thing that I have ever experienced. It was this inner body experience that I went through. So fast forward to about like February now, you know, we're on our last, you know, few dollars. We haven't been able to crack, you know, the code of how we generate revenue with this. Our users were still growing, which was a unique thing, you know, and we didn't get into the accelerator program. So now me as a CEO, I have to come back into the city and basically, you know, almost shut down the company, right? And lay off our staff members and our team members and stuff, right? And that was like such a painful experience, right? Because you know, kind of like along that thread of, you know, working in a team and that team dynamic, you know, as let's say as a coach, or as a captain, you bring people along with you on this journey, and you're like, you know what, if we follow this process and if we do task XYZ, you know, there's a really strong chance that we're going to get to the finish line and we're going to see the fruits of our labor here. But then, you know, you fall short and you only get to the bronze medal game, or you only get to the silver medal game. And yeah, you know, there's some things that you've gained across the journey, but it isn't what everybody invested their time and resources in for, right? So just kind of coming home and having to go through that process was really, I mean, I don't think depression was the right word, but it really just put me into a mental state where I just I wasn't myself. I wasn't stable. The young lady that I was dating at the time, we were living together, and she would wake up and she would go to, you know, she was in school at the time. She would go to school and I would still be in bed, right, for about 2 weeks straight. You know, I would still be in bed and just really just down on myself. But I had a decision, right? I had a decision to make as to whether I was going to let that define me, or whether I was going to take the learnings that I got from living in a big metropolitan city like that and apply it to something new, right? And thankfully I had my Bachelor of Commerce, so, you know, I could go and I could be an accountant, I could go work in finance or go do different things along that realm and stuff. But again, I just kind of had this like little glimmer of conviction still left, saying that, you know, I've been through this really painful experience, but maybe I can still double down and see what can arise from it. And so from about mid-February, I gave myself, you know, I didn't have any money. My dad basically gave me his credit card to basically just like live off. And I had 2.5 months to do something. Either I was going to create a new business, or after that 2.5 months, I was going to just go back into the workforce. And so back to that experience that we had with Founders Friday, or that I had with Founders Friday, and just how powerful that was for me, and how I found that just mobilized people's stories and also helped other people that were in the audience, you know, take those learning points and apply them to their like business, or just even the connectivity that they made in the room, you know, from a brand manager of Louis Vuitton interacting with an investment banker that worked on Wall Street. It was just so cool. So yeah, so for about 2.5 months, I kind of started to lay the foundations to what now people know as a Sea Tribe Festival. Back then we called it the Capsule Tribe Conference.
I seen that. I was like,
yeah, because
it makes sense.
Yeah, the app that we were building was called Capsule, and you know, my impression was, you know, I want to eventually return back to building this product because I still think there's validation behind it and there's still a use case for it, but we need money to do that. But what if we built the community first? What if we built the brand equity first? So that's where the name Capsule Tribe came from. And eventually just talking to some of my mentors and stuff that ran, you know, tens of thousand people, festivals and conferences, they're like, man, you got to change this name. you need something that's more scalable and more marketable and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, you know, May 25th was the day that we hosted, or May 24th, I think. Yeah, was the day that we hosted our first Capsule Tribe conference.
That was
2017.
2017.
Yeah. You know, over the full day, we had about 160 guests, and we had a, you know, full day experience. Some of those same speakers that I heard speak in New York, you know, I used my dad's credit card to fly them to Edmonton so that people could see and feel that energy that I felt. For about 2.5 months, I was, you know, calling different sponsors, basically calling up my friends, being like, hey, you got to buy a ticket to this, you know, come check this out. And, you know, I did it, right? I did it in a sense that it was something that I could look back at and be like, you know what, I took a very tough period and, you know, turned it into something that I believed in. And I mean, long and behold, you know, we fast forward 3.5 years later, you know, we've serviced 3,300 attendees over the last 3.5 years. Our last festival had 700 attendees. You know, we worked with brands and sponsors like Ciroc, RBC, Denton's, the City of Edmonton, Government of Canada. You know, they're all putting their money and resources, you know, where their mouth is and supporting us and whatnot. And yeah, we grew from this little 160 person 1-day event to becoming a 5-day, you know, 1,000 person, you know, multi-day event and stuff, right? So yeah, that's kind of the origins of the Sea Tribe Festival and kind of where we started from.
That's amazing that, you know, you were able to take your loss or you know, a tough time in your life and flip it on its head and turn it into a positive, you know. And I think that's the beauty of the struggle, is that, you know, you can fail at something and the bounce back is what's important.
Correct, yeah.
And you've bounced back and created something that's, I mean, 3 years is, you're doing pretty well. Obviously you're not satisfied, but you know, to be able to turn around and come with something that has, you know, started to maintain some sort of continuum and is reoccurring is amazing and is inspirational for any entrepreneur or anybody that wants to do something. And the point is, you went out and did something different first, right? And that didn't work out. Yeah. Right? But you still went and did it. And you failed at it. It happens. It's part of life. Yeah. And that led you to the next thing.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? But that first step and going out and saying, okay, I'm going to do this. You know, so you came out of school, said you're going to start your own company. Delusional. But, you know, it led to something that you probably never would have even fathomed at the beginning. And that's the amazing thing about life, is that, you know, you can think that you have it all figured out in your head and you go about it and, you know, things don't go the way you want, but something even better might come out of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you know, I've attended Sea Tribe, and I think it's a beautiful thing for the city. I think it's a beautiful way to inspire the city. It's a beautiful way to get people to double down on this wonderful place that I love to call, you know. And you know, I felt the vibes in there, you know, and I think we need to, as entrepreneurs, as creators, in this city, you know, we need to invest in our city, and that's exactly what you're doing.
Correct. Yeah.
You know, so
exactly.
Kudos to you. Give yourself a pat on the back, you know, and it's big, man. It's big. It's there's this feeling I get, you know, when I talk about people doing things like this, and it's the same feeling I get when I'm, you know, working on stuff for the podcast, or it's that, you know, it's the building blocks to something bigger and bigger than the individual.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, so it's awesome to see, man. I'm excited to see what else you have in store. You know, you accomplished a lot of things, from basketball to modeling to, you know, going out and starting a company and not getting the result you wanted, but coming out with something that's now it's a staple. It's an Edmonton staple now. Yeah, correct. You know?
Yeah, and thank you.
On top of that, it's black owned.
That's right.
You know, that's like that's the that's just the cherry on the cake.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm glad
sure.
I'm glad that we got to, you know, sit down and talk about it. You know, it's crazy because it's already been an hour 15 minutes.
Yeah, no kidding.
You know,
yeah. So I mean, I guess the irony in all of this is, you know, my girlfriend and I. So she lives in Dallas, Texas, and you know, I'm going to be spending a lot more time in Austin. You know, it's not going to be like a full move, but you know, just that I think it's really important that wherever we find inspiration, that we continue to draw from that same fountain, right? And that looks very different for some people, right? You know, some people find inspiration from watching YouTube videos or from, you know, reading a book or listening to a podcast or traveling to attend conferences, right? I find that my innate ability is unique in the sense where as soon as I go to a new destination, I find it very easy to meld and interact with the local population there. And given that Austin, Texas is, you know, there's basically been an exodus of a lot of tech talent from the major metropolitan hubs around the U.S., especially in New York and Silicon Valley and even Seattle to some degree. A lot of people are looking for different places to live and stuff, and Austin is just one of those places that is sticking out to people, giving the relative, you know, lower cost of living, and that's
where South by Southwest is based on,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. So for folks that may not know what South by Southwest is, it's, you know, arguably the largest and most sought after. You don't even know what to call it, because it's not a conference only, it's not a festival only, it's just this like huge event that brings droves and droves of people into the city for 2 weeks. And this is the first year in I think 20 years that they weren't actually able to host it. But, you know, guys like Elon Musk and, you know, they'll speak at it. You know, there's a lot of movies and Netflix series that had launched at South by Southwest and stuff. So it's this huge event that brings 400,000 people from I think 196 different countries and stuff. And it's tremendous what they've been able to do. But I mean, looking at their history, you know, they started off with just 200 people music festivals back in 1987 and stuff, right? So just to kind of be around that energy, and, you know, for me, like my inspiration and mentorship doesn't come necessarily from people that I directly know, but just from just being in the space that they're in and seeing how they move and seeing how they interact, and then taking that knowledge and bringing it back home, I think is really, 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 really powerful. So, you know, I've kind of made the decision with my girlfriend that, you know, so she lives in Dallas, so she's going to move to Austin with me. And, yeah, we're going to find ways to kind of bridge that gap and find ways to build that energy that people experience at South by Southwest in Austin, and, you know, have it translate to what we're building here with C Tribe in Edmonton, Alberta. So, yeah, I just thought I'd put that out there, and I think it's just really important where we identify where we seed inspiration from, and provide a contextual example there.
I think that's a really, really good point, because, you know, inspiration is very important. You know, I think some people make the argument that inspiration is a temporary feeling, but I tend to disagree, because when you're truly, truly inspired by something, you keep fighting to keep that inspiration alive. Yeah, you keep going to those same fountains that you said. You keep going to those same places to keep getting that inspiration, to keep, you know, pouring into your work. And, you know, I think that's a great point, that, you know, you're going there to not only live there, but gain the inspiration, right? Correct, yeah. A lot of people, when they move to places, their thing is, I'm going to make it in this city, which is again, delusional, but it's a tough way to, it's a tough transition, you know, especially if you're going somewhere without, you don't know nobody there.
Yeah.
You know, you got these big dreams of, you know, making it in Hollywood or being a rapper in Toronto or whatever the case may be. But your decision is a lot different. You're going there for the inspiration to bring it back to Edmonton, to the place you've been invested in or continue to invest in.
Exactly.
And I love that. And I think anybody that listens to this will try to find new ways to be inspired, try to find new ways to learn, just as you did. You know, you took it upon yourself, you confronted yourself, and you made amends with, you know, maybe some of your shortcomings, but you also doubled down on your strengths.
Yeah.
You doubled down on where you get inspired. You put yourself out there. You failed. A lot of people won't be able to go and do the interviews and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
But you did that.
Yeah.
And it's all a part of your process.
Exactly.
And you know, I'm just excited to see what you bring back to Edmonton. I'm here for it.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate you coming.
Hey, thank you, brother. Much love.
Absolutely,
Thank
man.
you.
Absolutely. You guys know what it is. 1K Convos. Unsubscribe, subscribe, and subscribe again. Big shout out to my other half of the Gifted Gab, Andre Kelly. Make sure you guys are tuned in to the 1K Convos. It's a race to 1,000. I want to thank our special guest one more time, Sahr Saffa.
Thank you.
And just like that, we gone.